Coming up next, more like Jane Airhead.
Well, like Charlotte Brontosaurus.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Bookening. My name is Nathan Alberson, your humble and obedient host. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, Nathan.
That's Brandon's voice.
Oh, yeah, that's
No,
sorry.
it's Nathan's voice. No. This is Brandon's voice. Hey, I'm Nathan. And I'm drooling on myself.
Fun fact, folks. Brandon thought that he could take on the master. He thought he could just...
Boy, did he ever do it successfully, because not only did he get the voice right, he managed to drool while he did it, which of course is 100%.
He actually started to drool.
I was just channeling you so much. I just started drooling.
It was a perfect impression. We haven't introduced anybody. No, we've introduced Brandon. I'm Nathan, your humble and obedient host. That's Brandon. He's your humble something or other. What are you?
I don't know.
The scholar who's a baller of reading. Ghost Brandon. And we got Beastmaster Funky Town himself, the pastor who's a master of reading, Jacob Kyle Menzel. How you doing, Jake?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much. Jane Austen, by the great C. Bronte. Talking about J.A.
Jane Austen?
Nope. False. Incorrect.
Biography of?
Jane Bronte.
Okay.
James Bronte.
James Bronte. J.M. Barrie. Brandon, what book are we reading?
Pizza Pan.
Jane Eyre.
Jane Eyre by the great
Charlotte Bronte.
Let's talk about the men in Jane Eyre's life. Let's just talk about them. She goes to Thornton. She goes to Thornton Hall, and she meets up with one
Edward.
E.F.
Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
She does. She meets him in a sneaky way.
Mm-hmm.
As far as storytelling goes, we don't know that she's actually met him.
But we've read a book before, so maybe the morons reading this book back in the day
didn't realize that she had met him.
Didn't realize she. That's an interesting thing. I wonder. I mean, it's not that interesting, but it's kind of interesting to ponder how much of this book was just obvious, the same way that because it's falling. Oh, I wonder if she's going to fall in love with Mr. Rochester. Like stuff like that. I wonder how much of that was conventional
created by books like this for us.
Let's ask Brandon. He probably knows. Is somebody reading this book back when it came out, would they have been expecting like, oh, this is a romance. This falls into a genre. This some things she's probably going to fall in love with this Rochester guy. They're probably going to be happy ever after. She's probably going to have some travails getting there. Is this following a set enough formula that people would have kind of known their place in the story the same way that we do?
Fairy tale formula?
By the 1830s, 40s, yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
people have been
Jane Austen
telling
had
fairy
been
tales.
Yeah,
since
Jane
the
Austen
beginning of
was.
time.
Jake makes a good point. This follows the Cinderella formula.
Yeah.
And Jane Austen had written her novels decades before this, and you'd had Pamela and all those novels in the 1700s, yeah.
I rescind my stupid question.
Yeah,
it was worth asking.
No, I thought it was worth asking. I like to ask stupid questions.
I'm not
That's
sure
not
it was
what
worth
I do.
asking.
Brandon says it's not worth asking. So she meets this Rochester fella.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the $1 million question as far as I'm concerned. What did you guys think about old Rochester? Old Rochi?
I liked him at first, sort of. I thought he was going to be an interesting character.
Did you know him as a type or as a name or as an idea? Were you aware that there was a guy named Mr. Rochester?
No,
before?
I did not know Rochester. I did not know the name of the guy that was going to show up. In fact, I wondered, given the way the first third of the novel worked, I mean, I knew, but I wondered what and how. I mean, I think I told you, like, oh, she's going to go work for a guy and the guy's going to fall in love with her and then a thing. But
yeah, there were two separate occasions where Jake pretty much outlined what was going to happen in this book. The interesting thing was that Charlotte Bronte was always, I guess I'll say a little bit ahead, not necessarily ahead, but Charlotte Bronte was always more interesting, slightly. Not 100% more interesting, but like, let's say 20% more interesting than what Jake predicted.
Yeah.
Like, she's going to get back together with Rochester. Jake predicts that. Well, yeah, but it's going to be this weird thing where he's half burned to death and blind.
I mean, like I predicted that.
You predicted the wife would burn down the house.
That she'd burn down the house and that she would end up killing herself in the process. Yes, I did predict
that. That's the only clean way out of that problem.
That was absolutely right, and it was completely set up by the dream.
Right.
And it was first set up by the first time we see her without seeing her. She tries to light Mr. Rochester on fire, right? And then she's up in the tower, and then she has the dream about Thornton Hall being in ruins on the night before the wedding when the demon witch is in her bedroom.
Well, and the demon wife killing herself is just, it's the only, I mean, unless this is going to be an adultery novel, this isn't the Scarlet Letter, it's not the Postman Always Rings Twice, it's not. So this is just the only way to solve the problem.
Yeah, and the best way to solve it, and if I would have put a little more thought into it, maybe I would have gotten some injury to Rochester, because the real clean way to solve it is Rochester,
he pays a price.
He pays a price trying to save her.
So it's not just like, that old hag finally got rid of herself.
It's not like, darn, the castle's on fire.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Oh, well.
He actually tried to go in there and save her, and then the cost for him thinking that he could see everything so clearly was that he lost his sight.
Good old Samson, buddy.
Yep.
Some more of those, or not themes, but just easy imagery for you.
Low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit. Well,
we're going to start doing like the people want. People like that sort of stuff.
People like low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, so we're going to go through, we're going to interpret all the low-hanging fruit for you people.
Let's talk about all of the biblical allusions throughout Jane Eyre, guys.
Yes, let's do it.
I think the
on
wife...
every page...
What do you think that how do you think that vision and sight played a thematic role in Jane Eyre?
Because people see things.
They all have eyeballs.
They all have eyeballs.
Except for Rochester at the end. But he gets them back.
We should just do the podcast in this kind of... The wife, she represents the other.
Is that what you people want?
No. They want a good podcast, and we are giving it to them.
Not faux intelligence.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
Please.
The Bookening caters to a more sophisticated, smarter kind of listener than that.
The Bookening caters to no one, and that's why it's not more popular.
However, for the very affordable price of $500, you can join
yeah, we will cater directly to you for money.
Literature podcast for dummies, where we will we'll walk through this stuff with you.
Yeah, if you want to pay $1,000,
you want to know why there are biblical allusions on every page? Because Charlotte Bronte had a chip on her shoulder.
Oh yeah, did she?
And man, you could see it a mile away. Why also was there French or some word that you had to look up in the dictionary on every other page? She had a big chip on her shoulder.
To be fair, people were smarter back then.
No. Jane Austen, 10 times the sophistication and 10 times the simplicity.
Yep, you're right. I was playing devil's advocate, and the devil was trounced. I will say...
Dickens doesn't do that either.
Dickens also didn't have the intelligence.
No, he didn't. But Dickens will do what do you want to call it? He'll do references to stuff that was going on, like topical stuff that would have been topical for his readers.
Yeah, that's fine. That's different. I love when I come to somebody like Dickens, that there are things that I don't get because he wasn't writing for me because it was 150 years ago. He was writing for actual real people. That's great.
I picked up on some foreshadowing. People listening to the podcast 5 years from now, you just heard the seed of why Jake will eventually be a fan of Dickens.
Yeah, it was foreshadowing. Yeah. Brendan had a dream. Jake was burning in a house.
I'm blind now.
Brendan's blind now. You know who it reminds me of is Brandon's favorite author, Idiot Face.
Yeah, that guy.
Dickens.
No. The guy that wrote the thing with the video games and stuff.
Oh, that guy.
Ernest Cline.
He's like, I know a lot of references about video games and stuff, and I'm going to cater to my audience and make them feel smart by talking about the dumb pop culture they know. That's kind of what Jane Eyre is doing. Or not Jane Eyre, that's what Charlotte Bronte is doing. It's like, you know French? Well, you can feel a little smarter now. You've read these books? Well, you can feel a little smarter now. You know this this $10 vocabulary word instead of the handy-dandy 5-cent word that I could have used? Well, you can feel a little smarter now.
See, okay, so that's one way of looking at it. Maybe this is worth teasing out because it's not the way that I looked at it. Pandering to smart, intelligent, sophisticated, et cetera, people.
Yeah.
But I just felt all the way through the chip on her shoulder, that she had such a chip on her shoulder just about being a lower class woman, that she was like, every page was like, how can I prove on this page?
I'm going to prove that I can go toe-to-toe with
that I'm smarter than
anybody.
Everybody reading this book. I want you to feel dumb, reader. Sophisticated nobleman, I want you to feel stupid, like, compared to me. And even like a lot of the wish fulfillment, even how she portrays, like, you think about how Austen portrays people of class, society, she's got some caricatures. She's got some. Austin has, the fools in there.
Some takedowns. Yep.
But Bronte reads like some sour grapes. Like Austin's takedowns are clean, but Bronte reads like, man, she's got a.
Yeah, I couldn't really put my finger on exactly why I agree with you, but I do. I'm not sure what the evidence is exactly, but that chick, the rich hoity-toity people that Rochester entertains for a while, there's something that feels nasty about that section that feels a little bit like Bronte is just like, ooh.
They're all stupid. They're all dumber than Jane, and they all treat Jane like trash.
So what's the difference between that and one of Austen's nasty type, Aunt Norris or somewhere, where it's clear that Jane Austen herself probably knew somebody like this, probably hated their guts, and wanted to take revenge forever after on them in the form of awesome literature. What's the difference?
Well, okay, I'm not sure, but let's try.
Well,
she gives, there are a couple, maybe a couple, it's just all more nuanced in Austen. I think it's just all more nuanced. It's like the one place you talk about Helen or us as the early saint and Aunt What's-Her-Face as the early villain. Mrs. Reed. There's a lot more going on in all of those scenes to make that work. But when you hit those middle portions of the book, there's absolutely not. The only time we see, it's like those people exist for no other purpose than to show how stupid the nobility are.
They're just caricatures. There's not the moment like with Mrs. Reed. There's tons of moments like that. It's interesting, actually. Mrs. Reed has tons of sympathetic and or human and
very human moments.
Yeah, just like she's
scared.
There
are no human moments with any of these other people.
Yeah,
there's not one human moment with the rest, with a lot of, there's just none.
Especially her chief rival, Blanche.
Yeah. And,
she's just cruel
Austen
to
Austen will give everybody, even the people she hates the most, a human moment or two too.
Well, and even their foibles, the things that make them nasty and annoying, are relatable. Like we've all been there.
Yeah, you get it. Like you understand why this person is the way that they are. You know this person. It feels like a real a person, a character that lives.
Well, and the eponymous Pride and Prejudice is of the heroine, and Fanny has the hero is always also foolish and also has to grow and also has to learn.
Right.
The difference between
we've said this over and over and over again in Austen, that the heroes aren't people that you always use Proverbs, the wise person and the fool. But we've talked before too about how in Austen it's simply the people who grow versus the people who don't.
Yeah, it's self-awareness versus no self-awareness.
Exactly. It's the people who mature versus the people who don't. The people who grow versus the people that don't. That's why Emma,
arguably one of the most annoying villains. Like, she's up there with Aunt Norris at the beginning of the book. Not that bad.
Yeah, but then she learns and grows and matures. And so what separates Emma from Lydia or any number of other fools in Austen is that Emma grows.
Yeah, there's a certain sweet sort of providence to it. Like, Emma's she doesn't know why she should be selected to be the one to grow and have self-awareness, but she is. Whereas Jane Eyre herself is generally always right, generally always going to tell off the dumb people in the book. Sort
of like Harry Potter.
It's a little bit like Harry Potter. It's way more nuanced. I mean, I just think Charlotte Bronte, you can accuse her of being a proto-feminist. You can accuse her of being a proto-everything.
I do.
But being a proto isn't the same as being a Nauto.
A Toto.
I agree 100%.
And someone who would have been a feminist now still, to me, doesn't feel like a feminist then. In other words, she's still operating from a lot of traditional assumptions. She's still got a lot of Judeo-Christian clothing that she wraps herself in, and not in a bad way, in a way that actually kind of works and gives the book some moral heft that somebody like Rowling, for example, just wouldn't have now, trying to do the same kinds of things.
That's why she goes to paganism.
Yeah. And so she should, I suppose. Where were we? How did we get all? I guess we were talking about, are there any dangling threads or loops we need to close, or can we talk about Rochester?
We can go back to Rochester.
Yeah.
I think I was the one who introduced the idea of Bronte having a chip on her shoulder.
Yeah, well...
And I don't remember what sparked it, but it was a digression from you trying to get us to talk about Rochester.
Let's close that loop. Brandon, do you agree do you think Bronte has a chip on her shoulder, or what do you think about their style?
Words. He was talking about the words and all that. I hadn't actually picked up on that, but it makes sense given...
He hadn't picked up on it because
Brandon's just like, some French.
It's great to see somebody who can match.
Finally, an author
vocabulary rises above
caliber.
Oh, hello,
the common bourgeois.
The rare woman who can actually think.
I say, what a delightful book.
Oh, she's trying.
Those are my thoughts. You guys expressed them perfectly. I was going to say, it makes sense from the context when we talked about that she went to that school.
That weird kind of progressive.
Yeah, and she had that teacher she especially admired, and she wanted to be seen as valuable in his eyes, but also she was competitive, and she wanted to be a successful but respected teacher. Successful and respected teacher. So I think it makes sense. I think that given her background and given her life, she definitely was a woman who had aspirations.
Yeah.
And that would come out in her writing because she would see herself as limited.
Well, you also said she was in her 20s when she wrote this, right?
Yeah.
Who doesn't overreach? I mean, just to have a little, maybe this is going to be like head-pattingly condescending to say, but
Fair. No, it's
who doesn't
100%
overreach
fair.
in their 20s? I mean, anybody that age is going to be writing beyond themselves and feeling a little insecure and trying to like throw their weight around
Absolutely.
a little bit. So,
And so to
Go
that
back
extent,
and
it's
listen to my
forgivable,
sermons from my 20s, please.
I can't read a thing that I wrote in my 20s. I mean,
Yeah.
you
You don't know what in the world you're doing at
Yeah.
that point. But you think you want people to think you do.
Well, Jake has a thing he always likes to quote from Ira Glass. What's the Ira Glass thing?
The Ira
Ira
Glass.
Glass is a podcaster and radio guy and if you don't know who Ira Glass is, he does This American Life.
Yeah, he's behind basically everything you love about NPR if you love that, or everything you hate about NPR if you hate that.
Mm.
But anyhow, what he talks about is that you get into creative work because you have taste and you have a desire, an aspiration to produce something that you really like. And what happens is, for most people, their first shot falls so far short of their tastes, what they esteem to be good, that they just quit.
They just give up.
And they become critics.
Yeah.
And what they don't realize is that it just takes a whole lot of work and elbow grease to just create something that meets your own standards.
Yep.
And often everybody out there who's doing creative work both has higher tastes and standards than anything that they produce, and has to have the humility to face down not just the rejection of other people, but their own rejection of what they've created, and to move past it. And that's what it takes to be a creator of something, is the ability to see and to keep aspiring after something that is always just sort of out of your reach.
Well, and you see that the reason I bring it up is because I think with a young writer, you can often see that they're caught somewhere in the middle of that tension, and they're trying to. There's a certain kind of humility that can come with age where you might still not be hitting your goal, but you're content to live kind of where you live and keep striving after it. But there's a young person thing where you're just like, I'm trying so hard to hit my goal. And that's how you get a bunch of dumb French and big vocabulary words and
Sort of arrogance to it as well.
Eyre, like Jane arrogance.
Arrogance, yeah.
I mean, there's a certain kind of person that, I don't know, that can live there and be content. The kind of person that gets stuck writing for the New York Times is somebody who has learned to write the kind of thing that stupid people think smart people sound like.
Yeah.
And it's just that sort of constant overreaching stuff, garbage.
In your face.
I can never tell how intentional it is, or if it's just somebody really stupid who, overreached and got the right amount of applause and just kind of continued overreaching, or if it was somebody who just sort of cynically said, stupid people want to read things that sound like the kind of thing they think smart people sound like. And
Or to be fair, somebody who had a wife and kids to provide for and had a job and did it. I mean, I can
sure.
I might be
I
so
just
bold
need
as
to
to
throw
put a positive spin on
$1,000 million words and obtuse metaphors in this in order to provide for my family, because people will think that that's somehow great. Yeah, I can see somebody doing that.
Well, that's what I do. And, well, who cares? We don't have to get into all that, but we can do another podcast about the creative process.
That's
but
not what you do.
Was that? That's not what I do. No, I swing for the fences. But
Home run.
And Fall Among the Stars or something like
I
that.
swing for the fences and fall among the stars.
I think isn't that the metaphor?
Yeah.
I will say
It's a beautiful metaphor.
it's a beautiful metaphor. Speaking of beautiful metaphors, I know what you mean. On the other hand, this is such a readable book, and I don't know that I would swap out any of that stuff because it feels to me almost more like a feature than a bug because it's just this particular voice and this particular person, and it feels so specific. I don't know.
Well,
this is just
a great book. It's a very readable and enjoyable book.
This is the most page-turning book.
I think that had those elements not been there, because I think actually what Jake is getting at, so like I said, I didn't necessarily pick up on that part, but I do think that you see it also in her philosophizing towards the end.
Absolutely.
And in the way that she handles the conclusions. And that is an extraordinarily immature mind.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no way around it. Anyone who thinks that the conclusion of this book is good is immature.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Agreed.
Yeah. I think the book is fantastic, but the way it ends is pretty bad.
Agreed.
So,
well, it's not even the ending. Like structurally, the ending's okay.
No, everything. Well, this is where structure saves her. Is that the end? It all structurally works. It's just that
one could have the same events happen and write about them in a mature way. But it ain't what she does.
And here's the thing, and we say this all the time on the Bookening: is it's okay to not imagine that every single thing that an author did just because it's in a book and it's old was perfect.
Right.
Even Shakespeare did bad things. I think A Midsummer's Night Dream is pretty bad.
Yeah. That's what we were dancing around and couldn't quite bring ourselves to when we did the episodes on it.
I think if we were to do that episode again, we'd all be like, wow.
We hated this.
This was pretty bad.
I would
what
say
was G.K. Chesterton smoking to think this was the best?
Well, sometimes G.K. Chesterton's pretty bad. Well,
he was smoking anti-modernism.
He was smoking anti-modernism.
And that's okay. Yep. Shakespeare didn't have everything Shakespeare didn't have to be perfect.
Well, and also, would you want it to be? That's the other thing I want to ask.
Square peg that you fit into the round hole of attacking your big enemy.
Yeah.
Which is what Chesterton was.
Yeah, this is all Chesterton does, which I love. But, would you go back and CGI walkie-talkies onto the people in E.T.? Do people like the Star Wars special editions? I mean, I actually don't mind them because I kind of grew up with them, sorry. But like Raiders of the Lost Ark, would you go back and make the faces melting into a more convincing special effect? No, part of the fun is the flaws, actually. Part of the fun of watching a movie Raiders of the Lost Ark is a pretty good example of something that was filmed quickly that has these little, you can see the seams sometimes. Indy falls down into the snake pit. There's a reflection. You don't want them to CGI out that. And so I think in the same way, this book, this is really obvious. Maybe this is a stupidly obvious point to make, but part of what makes it readable and fun are some of the very things that you might say, well, a more mature author might not necessarily do it quite that way.
That's the point where you realize you're not just dealing with Jane Eyre, you're dealing with Charlotte Bronte as well, and that she's not perfect, but that's a healthy way to approach a book.
Right.
Because if you end up just thinking that all you're doing is reading this perfect artifact, you get to some weird places.
Well, we make that point a lot, but I think this is a particularly good point to make it, because this is one of those books that's just accepted as part of not just the canon, but like the Christian canon, the homeschooling canon, the conservative canon. Everybody loves this book. This is the kind of book that you would just unthinkingly hand to your teenage daughter and say, hey, read this. This is a classic. And guess what?
Nope.
Bad idea.
Because Mr. Rochester.
This book has some creepy philosophy in it and some...
Mr. Rochester is here to tell your fortune.
Well, guys, let's get to it. I think we closed the other loop. And I don't know why closing loops is suddenly a thing that I'm obsessed with. I think because we used that phrase on an episode of Sound of Sanity. So now for me, for the next 3 months, everything's going to be about closing loops.
Got to close those loops, Nathan.
Got to close those
Let's
loops.
open that Rochester loop.
Let's open the rod. We already opened it, but now...
And the St. John.
And the St. John.
That's our theme for the rest of this episode?
Mm-hmm. Rochester. Let's talk about him.
Well, my first impression of Rochester was he's not like I've seen in the movies because he's supposed to be ugly in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at least that's the way he's described. Now, I had an interesting conversation recently with my wife and another lady.
Mm-hmm. They were telling you were ugly.
Yes. No. They were actually telling me that apparently Michael Fassbender, according to them, is not a good-looking guy.
Oh, I think he's...
Interesting.
I think he's pretty good-looking.
Yeah. And so that they thought he was a good Mr. Rochester.
Huh. Are we going to watch the Fassbender movie, by the way, guys?
We can.
I think so. It's a great movie. I thought it was a good movie.
All right, let's do it.
You think it was a good movie?
I've never seen it.
Oh, that was good.
I'd like to watch it for the Bookening.
So anyways, that was and so we talked about that. I was surprised.
Well, Well, Brandon, you were coming to this.
I was
for the first
offended
time.
because I obviously look so much like Michael Fassbender.
Exactly. If people need a handy sort of handle to think about what Brandon looks like, just imagine Michael Fassbender, maybe put 20% more muscles on him.
Yeah.
And
30% more height.
30% more height. Yeah. And if he's like 40% more fashionable,
Yeah.
you got Brandon.
That's me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, man, well, I guess.
He's
not good looking, but then what does that say about me?
What does that say about you?
No, so and then I'm sure if we do the Bookening, we'll talk about this. It's interesting things to say about how Hollywood and how they always will. Everything's sexualized.
Mm-hmm.
So even people who are supposed to be ugly become sexual objects.
Oh, they do. They do. It's like the girl with the glasses that's supposed to be ugly in the movie because she's
Yeah.
wearing glasses.
So that was interesting to me. So here we have this. It's a unique and interesting take on the romantic hero. He's supposed to be ugly.
Mm-hmm.
He's not supposed to be physically appealing at first. In fact, she says that were he physically appealing, she's sure she would have treated him differently at that point. But
Right.
he was kind of ugly, and so she just went with it when she first meets him at the pond. What they end up having is more of a union of minds
A union of the mind and of the soul.
than they do of physical attraction. It leads to physical attraction in the end.
Oh, does it?
Oh, I guess. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it does.
So it would seem.
So it would seem.
You never see it.
They had a couple kids.
So you have that, but I guess what I'm trying to say is when I first saw Rochester, he was an intriguing, interesting character because I'm like, here you have, he's surly, he's a bit like Darcy, but he's a little bit edgier, but he has a friendly streak as well. You kind of get the sense that he's doing all this to protect himself from some secret, but also intrigued by this young lady, and he's like the Beast, right? Is that the best metaphor we have for him? Is he kind of like the Beast?
You know, if you had to compare this to
Yes.
one fairy tale, it actually wouldn't be Cinderella. It would, in fact, be Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so
a
that's
good
who he is.
metaphor.
He's the Beast.
Yeah.
He wants everybody to think he's ugly and mean.
He's got fangs, razor sharp
And it's
ones.
because he has all these really
Killer
dark things
claws.
he did in his past. I mean,
Monster
he did
jaws
he did some
Actually,
legitimately
Killer
dark
Claws,
things.
Monster Claws, I think, for the feast.
for the feast.
Kill the Beast.
Hear him roar, see him foam, but we're not coming. Anyway, I'm sorry, Brandon.
Post.
When I was young, I ate 5 dozen eggs every morning to help me get large.
This is a very different song than the song that we were.
You were saying Mr. Rochester.
He's like the Beast.
He's like the Beast.
And yeah, and it's clear even from that first scene where she comes to have tea with him and Mrs. Fairfax is there. Miss Fairfax. And
Mhm.
she's fond of him and you're fond of Miss Fairfax. So you know that if she's fond of him, she's like Mrs. Potts.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If she's fond of him, there must be something there that wasn't there before.
There
It's-
must be
What,
something
Mama?
That
So-
wasn't there before.
I'll tell you when you're older, Nathan. I found him intriguing up to that point, and then things went off the rails.
You found him intriguing up to the point that he showed up and then things went off the rails? Is that-
Well, you have the tea party, and then even with Miss Ingram showing up, you realize that. And then when does he
I was
first tell?
fine with them just simply cynically deciding to go with Blanche Ingram.
Yeah, and when was it you first hear the story of his liaison with
the
the French courtesan?
Yeah, it's like they're walking by the...
That's before.
That's before all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you know that he has this dark past, and there's even more than that to it.
Yeah.
When he says things to Jane like, oh, that I should live with this guilt, I don't know.
Yeah, and he talks about error and repentance and remorse and all that jazz.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
that's jazz.
all that jazz.
Mm-hmm.
And he's supposed to have these thoughts that you really don't. I mean, that is one thing that bothered me from early on is she was amazed at his rock star romantic intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't really seem like rock star romantic intelligence to me. It kind of seemed like gibberish at points. But so I think that was one of the weaknesses of the book, actually, was she was trying to make him, I think, to kind of a Keats or Shelley sort of figure with his thoughts. He was this wounded figure who now had these high, jaded thoughts about life.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to read a couple of those
It was
portions.
so awesome. He was like able
Yeah.
to read her mind.
And I'm not,
be a step ahead of her. And
yeah, I fancy myself.
I read your thoughts. They blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I fancy myself to be fairly on top of things and to be able to stay up with difficult conversations. And that conversation they had in the tea room, the first conversation they had, it was kind of gibberish at times. What he was saying about remorse and error, I don't know what he was trying to say, but it definitely was seducing her.
Yeah.
I think that was the first instance you had of where it was going to go with Rochester. So I liked the concept of him. I didn't necessarily like the mechanics of some of how she was going about it early on.
I was willing to see where she was going to take. Well, she bought so much goodwill with that first.
Everything up to the hall, to Rochester. Is Thornton Hall? Is that what it is?
I'll tell you where it went off the rails for me. She bought me so much goodwill through up until she came to Thornton or Thornwell Hall or whatever it is, that I was with her all the way up until, and then she went and she had that whole thing with Aunt What's-Her-Face.
Which is great.
Which is awesome.
Where she goes and sees Mrs. Reed.
And then she comes back and Rochester proposes. That's when it all just sort of starts to slide off the rails. Because you have these scenes where now he's this like over the top, sentimental, terrible romantic that she has to sort of be demure and discipline him or whatever. But then he just straight up tells her like what he put on all of the big whole show of Blanche Ingram was all calculated to make her jealous from the very beginning, and all this other garbage about all of that. I was just like, oh, come on. Who is this guy?
Well, it reminds me of the difference between the novel, not that anyone should read these, but Silence of the Lambs. Hannibal Lecter is locked in a prison. Jodie Foster's character, whatever her name is, she goes and visits him. She gets advice. He plays mind games with her. At the end of that novel, he escapes. And then he's this in the novel Hannibal, he's this serial killer at large. And Hannibal Lecter becomes so much less interesting once all his cards are on the table. And once he's out there, eating people and stuff, it's like the idea of what he could do is way more interesting
than what he does.
And it's like nothing could actually live up to be fair, nothing could actually live up to what he does. And to be fair to Rochester, I would say actually writing a good romantic hero is much harder than writing a good, mysterious, Byronic figure. But it does feel, I agree completely that it takes a nosedive. And it's like you're reading a well-written thing by a grad student, and then suddenly you get to Rochester declaring his love, and the rest of the novel is written by a sophomore in high school or something like that. Like the depth of understanding, the morality, everything just like goes downhill.
It collapses. It caves in on itself. It's where she reaches her moral limits, the outer edges of her romantic emotional maturity.
Well, it's like we learned with Rowling and Dumbledore, you cannot write a character that's better than you. You can't, I guess you can in some sense, but
sure,
you know what I'm saying?
Sure you can. You can
imagine one, yeah.
Tolstoy did.
Yes, but I have to believe there was something actually moral about Tolstoy, though.
There's something moral about his imagination.
Right.
Yeah, I think that Levin was who Tolstoy could have and should have been.
And he knew
that. Or who he aspired to be and what he knew that he should have, he, like, it's like the Ira Glass quote that we brought up earlier that wasn't a quote, though. It's like, the question is, with Tolstoy, he has a moral imagination that transcends his ability to live morally. Right? That's one thing. But to have a stunted moral imagination is a completely different thing. And in both cases, you're not able to live up to your ideals. But, if your ideals are stunted or deformed, and that's where you really begin to hit the wall with Bronte, is what you realize is part of what's great about the first part of the book is she's really able to capture what it is to be a broken and abused child. And
then the rest of the book is just about broken and abused children pretending to be adults.
Yeah, while being incapable of overcoming the brokenness and immaturity. Because the author can't imagine she herself is stunted in her moral imagination.
Right.
And so she just can't take them any farther than she did. She can capture the brokenness, she can capture the immaturity, she can capture the abuse, she can capture all kinds of things. But she can't give them the happy ending because she doesn't have the moral imagination to get there, because she doesn't have it herself. She doesn't have those goods. She's got everything else nailed to the wall, but she doesn't have that. And it's sad. It makes me sad. It made me sad for Bronte as I read it, because I just thought, I didn't know any of your history. I didn't know anything. I just thought, you start to imagine all of the things that could have happened to her as a child. Yeah. To both give her such clarity on this brokenness and abuse, and also such an opaque understanding of what healthy relationships look like and should look like. And should
opaque
be.
Understanding being a very generous way to put her understanding, I think, of.
Well, I'm trying. I
know you're trying.
I feel so sympathetic. I like you. Well, the thing is, you deal with these people. I deal with these people all of the time, from broken and difficult situations and circumstances. And I'm not from the cleanest background myself. And you want But for so many people recovering from abuse or a broken home or whatever, it's so hard to have a healthy family because they've never seen it before. And you can tell them all you want to until you're blue in the face about what they should be doing and why. And they don't have the tools to understand. They can't put it all together because they're looking through a mirror that is spider-webbed into 1,000 different pieces. God can overcome and will overcome and does overcome a lot in people's lives, but that's miraculous work. And for most people, it's just hard. That's all.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Well, and we can have great sympathy for those people while also saying maybe they shouldn't create a universe. And when they do, it's a pretty warped place to live.
Yeah.
And it's got some weirdos and some.
Yeah. And that's the case with this book. There's Rochester and St. John are
terrible people.
They're terrible people. And so what you come to, everything with Bronte then comes down to this worship of power.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything is about power. It's about power. It's about power dynamics. And so whether you're strong and powerful and courageous or manipulative and whatever, like it's all about the power that people can exercise over each other. It's
disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
And another failure here. And I'm just thinking about all the young ladies who come away thinking that Rochester is the most amazing thing ever and that Jane Eyre is perfect. Who really failed them was their English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
No kidding.
Yeah. Read this book with open eyes.
Whoever their English teacher was failed them.
Mm-hmm. This is a potent and dangerous and extremely well-written book, and you got to take those things seriously. Give this book the credit that it deserves as a great pice of literature that can change people.
This is a dangerous
and
book for your daughters. It's a dangerous book for your daughters.
Well, guys, there's so much to talk about in this sick, twisted puppy of a book.
But a good one.
But also we like it. Or do we? Anyway, Brendan likes it. We'll be back next week. Let's do some donor shout outs. We're going to talk more about Rochester. We haven't even gotten to St. John, that weirdo.
My least favorite weirdo.
No, I did not like St. John.
This book goes off the rails, people.
It is a strange book.
It's like you're going on just to find Disney, it's a what is it? It's a big world after all.
It's a small world after all.
World after all, and you're happy, everybody's waving, and it's cool. The animatronics are realistic, and it's a great story. And then suddenly, like, the gates of hell open up, and here's Rochester dressed as a gypsy. And he turns to you and he says, "You thought I was a gypsy? No, I'm Mr. Rochester. Hold on!" And then you start speeding down, and then you're like, Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory tunnel, and it goes crazy.
There's no earthly way of knowing which direction
the novel literally loses its mind.
Yeah, I know. Well, let's talk about it more next week.
Yeah.
But let's do some donor shout outs. Robert Ronda, the Lovebirds. Chelsea Immortally. Jake. Katie. Nathan, not me.
Nathan, not Nathan.
Jim and Annie, Little Oakley.
Annie, Little Oakley.
Lily of the Valley.
Lily Valley.
Andrew and Esther, the Lovebirds.
Esther, Lovebirds.
Jake, I need some shout outs from you for our people.
Jake, I need some shout outs for you for some people.
The Inscrutable Jenny Z.
Inscrutable Jenny.
John and Jill and Lovebirds. Keith Master. David's Mighty Men. Trucking for all your trucking needs. Jay and Katie, who are cold and love cheese. Beth, my beloved mother. Fletcher, the woe-bedraggled wizard of yore.
Woe-bedraggled.
The awful actor of Georgia.
Hey there.
Word, Smurf.
The red-hooded Lord of Death.
Red-hooded this day.
To the dark-hooded
Lord of Death.
He's red-hooded this day. Not this day.
Red-headed today.
The incandescent Meredith. Jane to my Rochester.
Incandescent Meredith.
Joanna.
The
elven princess of all that is good and light.
The elephant princess.
The elephant princess?
The elephant princess.
Oh, the elven princess.
The elven.
Were elephants on?
Ryan and Judith. Rockin' Ryan and Judah. Danny the Dude. DJ Sammy G. Benny and Dana
T.
The Lovebirds. Eric and Catherine the Lovebirds.
Catherine
Professor X and Lady X.
Professor and Lady X.
Thanks for supporting our work, everyone.
Maya.
Oh, sorry, Maya.
Maya. I'm
talking about Maya.
Maya.
Dun dun dun. How did I skip her? That's weird. I guess because I was doing a bunch of nonsense. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to The Bookening. You can go to The Bookening. Nope. You can go to patreon.com/The Bookening. You can pledge money and get cool stuff behind the paywall.
Do it.
Good.